The American Revolution was not a sudden event. It was a movement born out of years of tension, economic exploitation, and political struggle. By the mid-18th century, the 13 British colonies in North America had become increasingly self-reliant, but they were still under British rule. The colonists were growing frustrated with Britain's policies, especially those that taxed them without representation in Parliament. One of the first major sparks of discontent was the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. Although Britain and its American colonies won the war against the French, the British government found itself deeply in debt. To recover financially, Britain imposed heavy taxes on the colonies. The Stamp Act of 1765, which taxed all printed materials, was met with fierce resistance. Colonists, led by groups like the Sons of Liberty, protested, arguing that they had no representatives in the British Parliament to voice their concerns. Their slogan, "No taxation without representation," became the rallying cry for resistance. Tensions escalated further when the Townshend Acts of 1767 imposed taxes on everyday goods like paper, glass, and tea. In response, American merchants organized boycotts of British goods. The situation reached a boiling point on March 5, 1770, when British soldiers fired into a crowd of unarmed protesters in Boston, killing 5 civilians. This event, known as the Boston Massacre, fueled anti-British sentiment across the colonies. By 1773, Britain tried to enforce its monopoly on tea by passing the Tea Act, leading to the famous Boston Tea Party, where American patriots disguised as Native Americans dumped an entire shipment of British tea in a Boston harbor. Britain retaliated with the Intolerable Acts, which shut down Boston Harbor and imposed strict control over Massachusetts. These harsh measures convinced many colonists that war was inevitable. The first major step toward unity came in 1774, when representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies met at the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. They issued a declaration of colonial rights and urged colonies to prepare militias in case of British aggression. Tensions had reached the point of no return. On April 19, 1775, the first shots of the Revolution rang out in the battles of Lexington and Concord. British troops were sent to seize colonial weapons, but they were met by armed militia, known as Minutemen. The confrontations resulted in casualties on both sides, marking the official start of the American Revolutionary War. After the initial battles, the Second Continental Congress convened in 1775, taking bold steps towards self-governance. They appointed George Washington as the commander of the newly formed Continental Army. The war had officially begun, but many colonists still hoped for reconciliation with Britain. However, King George III rejected their appeals, declaring the colonies in full rebellion. One of the most significant moments in the Revolution came on July 4th, 1776, when the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, primarily authored by Thomas Jefferson. This document not only severed political ties with Britain, but also laid the foundation for democratic ideals, declaring that all men are created equal and that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. Despite this bold declaration, victory was far from guaranteed. The British Army was the most powerful in the world, well-trained and well-equipped. In contrast, the Continental Army was poorly supplied and frequently outnumbered. The Americans suffered early defeats, including the loss of New York in 1776. However, Washington turned the tide with a daring attack on Hessian forces at Trenton on Christmas night, boosting morale among his troops. The war escalated in 1777 when American forces won the decisive Battle of Saratoga, convincing France to enter the war as an ally. France provided military aid, ships, and troops, which significantly strengthened the American cause. Soon, Spain and the Netherlands also declared war on Britain, shifting the global balance of power in favor of the revolutionaries. The struggle for independence continued with brutal winters, supply shortages, and intense battles. The winter at Valley Forge, 1777 to 1778, tested Washington's army like never before. Thousands of soldiers suffered from hunger, disease, and exposure. However, the arrival of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer, helped train the Continental Army, transforming it into a more disciplined and effective fighting force. Meanwhile, in the southern colonies, British forces launched aggressive campaigns, capturing Savannah and Charleston. However, guerrilla fighters like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, harassed British troops, employing hit-and-run tactics that wore down the enemy. By 1781, British forces, led by General Charles Cornwallis, found themselves in a precarious position in Virginia. In a bold and coordinated effort, Washington's army, alongside French forces under General Rochambeau, besieged the British at Yorktown. With French naval forces blocking their escape by sea, Cornwallis had no choice but to surrender on October 19, 1781. This victory effectively ended major combat operations. After nearly 8 years of conflict, the war formally ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Britain recognized the United States of America as an independent nation, ceding vast territories from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River. The American Revolution was not just a war. It was a revolution in political thought. The founding of the United States introduced radical ideas about governance, personal liberties, and democracy that would inspire movements worldwide. The Constitution and Bill of Rights, drafted in the years following the war, established a framework for government based on the principles of separation of powers, checks and balances, and individual rights. However, the revolution did not bring freedom to all. Slavery remained a divisive issue, and women and Native Americans saw little immediate change in their status. The ideals of the revolution, freedom, democracy, and self-rule, would continue to be debated and redefined in the centuries that followed. The war also reshaped the global stage. Britain lost its most valuable colonies, while France, despite its victory, was left in financial ruin, contributing to its own revolution in 1789. Meanwhile, the success of the American Revolution inspired independence movements in Latin America, Europe, and beyond. The American Revolution was not just about breaking free from Britain. It was about creating a new identity and laying the foundation for a nation that would grow into a global power. The struggles and sacrifices of the revolutionaries ensured that future generations would inherit a land built on the ideals of liberty, self-determination, and democracy. Today, the echoes of the revolution can still be heard in the principles that guide the United States, serving as a reminder of the cost of freedom and the power of unity in the face of adversity.